They thought a layer of cheap foundation could hide the purple marks on her skin. They thought the Alpha King, a man known for slaughtering rebellions before breakfast, wouldn't care about a nameless Omega whisking gravy in the back of a roadside diner. They were wrong. On the night of November 14th, inside the Rustling Pine restaurant, Alpha Declan Blackwood didn't just tip the waitress. He tasted a sorrow in his soup so profound it triggered his primal instincts. What happened in the next 48 minutes didn't just destroy a business. It dismantled a hierarchy and left an entire town too terrified to speak. This is the story of Sophie Hart and the silence that followed her scream. Date, November 14th, 2023. Location, Oakhaven Territory, Northern Sector. The snow in Oakhaven wasn't the romantic, fluffy kind you see in movies. It was hard, grey, and packed into ice that snapped ankles. The town itself was a flyover pack, a small community of 3,000 wolves who mostly worked in the lumber yards or the canning factory. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, but nobody said a word about it. At the center of the town sat the Rustling Pine, a high-end steakhouse owned by the pack beta, a man named Gareth Miller. Gareth was a man who smiled with too many teeth. He was 45, bulky, and wore suits that were expensive but ill-fitting, straining against a neck thick with muscle and arrogance. In the back of the house, where the customers couldn't see the black mold in the grout or the flickering fluorescent light, was Sophie Hart. Sophie was 22, though her eyes looked 100. She was an Omega, the lowest rung of the Oakhaven ladder. Her parents had died in a car accident on Route 9 when she was 8, leaving her with a mountain of debt attached to the pack's community fund. Gareth Miller had generously taken her in to work off the debt. 14 years later, the debt had somehow only grown. Tonight, the kitchen was a war zone. "Faster, you useless stray!" Gareth barked, slamming his hand onto the stainless steel counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Sophie flinched, instinctively tucking her left arm against her ribs. She was plating a venison osso bucco. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't drop the garnish. "Yes, Beta Miller, I'm sorry." "The king is at table 1, Gareth hissed, leaning in close. Sophie could smell the stale whiskey and peppermint on his breath. "If this meat is dry, if the sauce is broken, if there is a single hair on that plate, I won't just use the belt tonight. I'll put you in the cellar with the dogs." Sophie swallowed hard, nodding. She knew he wasn't lying. She touched her left cheekbone. It was throbbing under a thick layer of drugstore concealer. Earlier that morning she had dropped a crate of tomatoes. Gareth had backhanded her so hard her vision had gone white for a minute. She finished the plate. It was perfect. The sauce was a dark, glossy reduction of juniper and blackberries, a recipe she had invented herself, though Gareth told the customers it was an old family secret. "Go," Gareth ordered the waiter. Out in the dining room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Alpha King Declan Blackwood sat alone. He was a myth made flesh. Standing 6'5", he took up too much space even when sitting. He had dark hair cut with military precision and eyes the color of a stormy sea, grey and turbulent. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in the capital, dealing with treaties. But a sudden blizzard had grounded his helicopter, forcing his convoy to stop in Oakhaven. His bodyguards, 2 massive enforcers named Kieran and Bastian, stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the locals pretending to eat their dinners. Declan looked at the plate placed before him. He was tired. He was hungry. And he hated sycophants like Gareth Miller, who was currently hovering by the wine rack, sweating through his shirt. Declan picked up his fork. He took a piece of the venison, dragged it through the dark sauce, and put it in his mouth. He stopped. The restaurant went silent. Gareth Miller held his breath. Declan didn't chew immediately. He let the flavor sit on his tongue. It was savory, rich, and perfectly balanced. But there was something else. To a wolf of his power, food wasn't just fuel. It carried the intent of the maker. Some food tasted like pride. Some tasted like indifference. This tasted like grief. It tasted like crying in the dark. It tasted like fear, so sharp it felt like metallic shavings in the back of his throat. It was the most delicious thing he had eaten in years, and yet it made his wolf pace restlessly inside his chest. Declan set the fork down with a clink that sounded like a gavel dropping. Gareth Miller rushed forward. "Your Majesty, is something wrong? I can have the chef flogged. I mean, fired. I can—" Declan held up one hand. Gareth froze. "Who cooked this?" Declan asked. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the floorboards. "My head chef, Pierre," Gareth lied smoothly. "He studied in Paris. Bring him out," Declan commanded. Gareth signalled frantically. A tall, lanky man in a pristine white chef's coat came out. Pierre looked nervous but proud. He bowed low. Declan looked at Pierre. He sniffed the air. He smelled cigarettes, onion, and arrogance. "You made this sauce?" Declan asked. "Yes, Your Majesty," Pierre said, puffing out his chest. "A reduction of juniper and—" Declan moved so fast no one saw him stand. One moment he was seated. The next, he had Pierre by the collar, lifting him 3 inches off the ground. "Do not lie to your king," Declan snarled, his eyes flashing gold. "This sauce was made with love and pain. You smell like neither. You smell like a fraud." He dropped Pierre, who scrambled back, terrified. Declan turned his gaze to Gareth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who cooked the meat?" Gareth was shaking now. It's just the kitchen girl, the helper. She's nobody. She's dirty, Your Majesty. You don't want to see her." "Bring her," Declan said. "Now." Sophie was scrubbing a pot when the kitchen doors burst open. Gareth didn't speak. He just grabbed her by her apron straps. "He wants to see you," Gareth hissed, his face purple with rage. "If you say one word about me, if you look him in the eye, you're dead, Sophie. Do you hear me?" She nodded, too terrified to speak. She tried to wipe her hands on a towel, but Gareth dragged her out before she could fix her hair or check her makeup. Walking into the dining room felt like walking into an execution. The silence was absolute. Every eye was on her. Sophie was small, barely 5'3". Her chef's whites were grey with age and stained with grease. Her hair was messy, tucked under a net. She kept her head down, staring at the polished wood floor. She could smell him before she saw him. Rain, ozone, and something distinct. Cedarwood. It was the scent of the Alpha King. It hit her so hard her knees almost buckled. It was a scent that demanded submission, but her wolf didn't cower. For the first time in years, her inner wolf lifted its head and whimpered, not in fear, but in recognition. "Look at me," the voice commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm order. Sophie slowly lifted her head. She tried to keep her face turned slightly to the right, hiding the left cheek where the bruise was hidden. She looked into Declan Blackwood's eyes. Declan felt the air leave his lungs. He had expected an old woman. He had expected a seasoned chef. He hadn't expected her. She looked like a gust of wind could blow her away. Her eyes were large and the colour of honey, but they were swimming with terror. But his eyes didn't stop at hers. Being the Alpha King meant having senses sharper than any living creature. He looked at her left cheek. To a human, it looked like skin. To Declan, he could see the chemical layer of the concealer. He could smell the coagulated blood beneath the surface. He could hear the slightly irregular beat of her heart, consistent with someone living in chronic adrenaline mode. He stepped closer. Gareth stepped forward to intervene. "Your Majesty, she is mute. She is slow in the head. Kieran," Declan said, not looking away from Sophie. "Yes, Alpha," the bodyguard responded. "If that man speaks again, remove his tongue." Gareth clamped his mouth shut, his face draining of colour. Declan closed the distance between him and Sophie. He towered over her. The entire town watched, holding their breath. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Sophie opened her mouth, but her throat was dry. She coughed, terrified she had offended him. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Hart, Your Majesty." "Sophie," he tested the name. It tasted like the sauce, sweet and sad. "Did you make this?" He gestured to the plate. Yes, Alpha. Why does it taste like that? Sophie blinked. Like what, sir? Like you want to go home, but you have nowhere to go. A tear leaked out of Sophie's right eye. She couldn't stop it. The accuracy of his words pierced her armor. She quickly wiped it away, smearing a bit of flour on her face. I just cook what I'm told, Alpha. Declan reached out. His hand was large, scarred from battles. He moved it toward her face. Sophie flinched violently, raising her arm to protect her head. The movement was pure instinct. It was the reaction of a beaten dog. The dining room went deadly still. Declan's hand froze in midair. He didn't touch her. He slowly lowered his hand, his eyes darkening from grey to a pitch black. The wolf was surfacing. He looked at her arm. The sleeve of her jacket had slipped down slightly when she raised it. On her wrist there were marks, circular burns, cigar burns. Declan didn't roar. He didn't flip the table. He went quiet. And that was far, far worse. He looked at Sophie, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a terrifying, cold smile. Sophie, I would like to hire you. Gareth couldn't help himself. Hire her? She belongs to the pack. She has a debt. Declan turned to Gareth. A debt? Excellent. I'm a wealthy man. I love paying debts. He turned back to his enforcer. Bastian, get the car. We aren't leaving tonight. Where will we stay, Alpha? Bastian asked. Declan looked around the terrified restaurant, his gaze landing on Gareth. I think we'll stay here. I want to see exactly how this business is run. I want to see the books. I want to see the staff quarters. And I want to know exactly how much Sophie owes. He turned back to Sophie. Go get your things, little one. You aren't sleeping in the kitchen tonight. Date, November 15th, 2023, early morning. Location, the Gilded Antler, staff quarters/basement. Sophie didn't have things. She had a backpack with a broken zipper, 2 changes of clothes that were threadbare, and a locket with a picture of her mother. When Bastian, the Alpha's guard, escorted her to the penthouse suite of the local hotel, where the king had set up a temporary command center, she felt like she was hallucinating. But back at the restaurant, the horror was just beginning for Gareth Miller. Declan Blackwood did not sleep. He sat in Gareth's office, a small, smoky room that smelled of grease and cheap cologne. Kieran was piling ledgers onto the desk. This is messy, Alpha, Kieran muttered, flipping through a blue binder. Double books, ghost employees. But look at this. He slid a paper across the desk. It was Sophie's debt contract. Declan read it. The paper was yellowed. Original debt, $15,000, parents' funeral costs and property damage. Interest rate, 45% compounding monthly. Current balance, $280,000. It's illegal, Declan said calmly. Even by pack law, interest cannot exceed 5%. This is slavery disguised as math. There's more, Kieran said, his voice grim. I checked the medical logs for the town. Sophie Hart hasn't been to a doctor in 6 years, but the local pharmacy has records of her buying peroxide, bandages, and heavy concealer every Tuesday. Tuesday, Declan repeated. Why Tuesday? Inventory day, Kieran said. Gareth gets drunk on inventory day. Declan stood up. He walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, burying the town in white. But Declan saw only red. He's been hunting her, Declan said softly. Not for sport. For power. He breaks her down to build himself up. It's the behavior of a weak wolf trying to feel like an alpha. What are your orders? Kieran asked. Do we execute him? No, Declan said. Death is too quick. He liked to keep her in the dark. He liked to hide her bruises. We are going to turn on the lights. Every single one of them. Declan turned back to the desk. Call the council. Summon the regional alphas. Tell them I am holding a tribunal in Oakhaven tomorrow at noon. And tell Gareth Miller that if he tries to run, I will let the wild rogues have him. Back at the hotel, Sophie sat on the edge of a king-sized bed. The sheets were silk. She had showered, the hot water turning brown as the grime of the kitchen washed away. She looked in the mirror. Without the makeup, her face was a map of violence. A purple hematoma on her cheek, A split lip. There was a knock at the door. Sophie jumped. "Come in?" The door opened. It was Declan. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, just a black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He held a small first aid kit. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bed. Sophie nodded, trembling. He sat down next to her. The mattress didn't creak. He opened the kit and took out a salve that smelled of eucalyptus and magic, alpha healing balm. "This will sting," he warned. He touched her face. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, waiting for the shouting. "Open your eyes, Sophie," he whispered. She opened them. He was staring at her with an intensity that burned. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, applying the balm gently to her cheek. "He said—" Sophie's voice cracked. "He said I was nothing. He said if I left, the pack would hunt me down. He said no one wants a broken thing." Declan stopped. His thumb brushed over the bruise. "You are not broken," Declan said firmly. "You are stained. Stains wash out. Breaks. Breaks heal stronger." He capped the salve. "Tomorrow the town is going to gather. You are going to stand next to me." "I can't," Sophie panicked. "They'll stare. They all know. They all watched him do it, Alpha. The sheriff, the mayor. They ate the food while I was bleeding in the back. They didn't care." "Exactly," Declan said, his voice cold as ice. "They watched. And tomorrow, they will watch me." He stood up to leave, but stopped at the door. "Sophie?" "Yes, Alpha?" "The venison," he said. "It was the best I've ever had. My mother used to make it like that." He walked out, leaving Sophie alone in the warmth, clutching the silk sheets, realizing for the first time in her life she wasn't cold. But downstairs, Gareth Miller was not planning to attend the tribunal. He was in the basement of the Rustling Pine, pouring gasoline over the floorboards. If he was going down, he was going to burn the evidence, and the town, with him. And he knew one secret Declan didn't. Sophie wasn't just a random orphan. The reason Gareth kept her close, the reason he beat her to keep her submissive, was because of her bloodline. If the king found out who her father really was, Gareth wouldn't just be executed. He would be tortured for eternity. He lit a match. Date, November 15th, 2023, 2:17 a.m. Location, the Rustling Pine Steakhouse. Declan Blackwood woke up not to a sound, but to a smell. Even 5 stories up in the hotel suite, even through the heavy snowfall outside, his alpha senses detected it instantly. Wood smoke, accelerant, and the underlying acrid tang of panic. He was out of bed and dressed in 30 seconds. He checked on Sophie in the adjacent room. She was finally sleeping deeply, curled into a tight ball in the center of the massive bed, the healing balm already reducing the swelling on her cheek. "Bastian," Declan spoke into his secure comms unit. "Stay with the girl. If anyone enters this floor who isn't me, put them down." "Understood, Alpha." Declan didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, moving with a speed that blurred the security cameras. When he burst out onto the street, the sky over Oakhaven was glowing orange. The Rustling Pine was an inferno. The old timber frame of the building was consumed by flames that licked 50 feet into the winter air. The snow hissed as it hit the heat, creating blinding clouds of steam. A small crowd of townsfolk had gathered, watching in pajamas and winter coats, their faces illuminated by the destruction. The local volunteer fire department was there, directing feeble streams of water onto the blaze, but it was clear they weren't trying to save the building. They were just trying to stop it from spreading to the neighboring shops. Declan shoved past the mayor, a shivering man named Arthur Pendleton. "Where is Gareth?" Declan demanded. Mayor Pendleton stammered, his eyes wide. "We don't know. We think he's still inside. The doors were chained from the inside, Your Majesty." Declan looked at the burning structure. The heat was intense enough to singe hair at 50 yards. "Kieran!" Declan barked over the roar of the fire. His lead enforcer appeared at his side, soot already streaking his face. "The basement access is around the back, Alpha. The fire hasn't reached down there fully yet. but the structure is unstable. He's trying to destroy something more than just books, Declan growled. He's trying to erase history. Against the shouts of the fire chief, Declan kicked in the heavy oak side door, disappearing into the smoke. Inside, the air was unbreathable. The ceiling beams were groaning. Declan dropped to a crouch, his wolf vision cutting through the grey haze. He found the stairs to the basement office. The heat down here was oppressive, a physical weight. In the centre of the office, surrounded by piles of burning ledgers, stood Gareth Miller. He held a metal lockbox under one arm and a tire iron in the other hand. Gareth looked up, his eyes manic, reflecting the flames. He laughed, a sound that turned into a hacking cough. "You're too late, King," Gareth screamed. "It's all gone. The debts, the contracts, the truth." Declan didn't slow down. He crossed the room in 2 strides, knocking the tire iron away and pinning Gareth against a concrete wall that was hot to the touch. "You think fire stops me?" Declan snarled, his voice dropping an octave into a true alpha resonance that made the concrete vibrate. "I will burn this entire town to ash to find the truth." Gareth struggled, the metal box clanging against the wall. "You don't know what she is. You think you're saving a stray puppy? You're saving a monster. She is a victim of your cruelty. She's a curse," Gareth spat, blood coating his teeth. "Why do you think I kept her beat down? Why do you think I never let her look people in the eye? If she ever realized what she could do, if you ever realized whose blood she has—" Above them, a massive support beam cracked with the sound of a cannon shot. The ceiling began to cave in. Declan grabbed the metal lockbox from Gareth's grip and hauled the heavier man over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He charged up the stairs just as the office behind them collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. They burst out into the snowy alleyway, coughing and covered in ash. Kieran was there instantly, taking custody of a thrashing Gareth. Declan stood up, brushing embers off his shoulders. He looked down at the metal lockbox in his hand. It was scorched, but intact. He didn't open it there. He looked at Gareth, who was being zip-tied by Kieran. "A monster," Declan said quietly. "We shall see. Date: November 15th, 2023, 10 a.m. Location: the hotel suite. The smell of smoke clung to Declan, a stark contrast to the pristine environment of the hotel suite. Sophie was awake, sitting at a small dining table, staring nervously at a room-service breakfast feast she hadn't touched. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, pastries. It was more food than she usually saw in a month. When Declan entered, she stood up quickly, her chair scraping loudly. The bruise on her cheek had faded from angry purple to a dull yellow thanks to the balm, but her eyes were still full of that ingrained fear. "Sit," Declan said, placing the scorched metal lockbox on the table. Sophie sat. She eyed the box. Did the restaurant burn down, Alpha?" "To the ground," Declan said flatly. He watched her reaction. Sophie didn't look sad. She didn't look relieved. She just looked numb. "Where will I work now?" The question broke Declan's heart. She was free, and her first thought was where she would serve next. "You will never work again, Sophie, not unless you choose to." Declan pulled a chair opposite her. He placed a small, silver object on the table between them. It was the locket he had seen Kieran retrieve from her backpack earlier. It was cheap silver, tarnished around the edges. "Gareth Miller said something to me in the fire," Declan began, his grey eyes locked onto her honey-coloured ones. "He said he was afraid of what you are." Sophie shrank back. I'm nobody. I'm just an omega. I'm clumsy. That's why he had to correct me so much. I promise, I'm not bad." "Stop." Declan's voice was sharp, making her jump. "Do not repeat his lies. You are not clumsy. You are terrified. There is a difference." He pushed the locket toward her. "Who's in this picture?" Sophie picked it up with trembling fingers. She clicked it open. Inside was a tiny, faded colour photograph of a woman with laughing eyes and hair the same colour as Sophie's. "My mother," Sophie whispered. "Sarah Hart. She died when I was 8. And your father? He died in the same crash. I don't have a picture of him. Gareth said my father was a drunk rogue who got my mother killed," Declan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of metal he had pried from the lockbox before coming upstairs. It was a heavy silver ring, blackened by fire but still legible. He placed the ring next to the locket. The ring bore a crest. It wasn't the crest of the local Oakhaven pack. It was an ancient symbol, rarely seen in modern times, a wolf rampant holding a crescent moon in its jaws. Sophie frowned. That's the drawing my mother used to doodle on my lunch napkins. Declan felt a chill go down his spine. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Sophie, Declan said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Your mother wasn't just Sarah Hart, and your father wasn't a drunk rogue. He tapped the ring. This is the crest of the Argentis bloodline. Sophie stared blankly. The name meant nothing to her. 50 years ago, the Argentis family were the royal executioners, Declan explained. They were powerful wolves, rare wolves. They had an ability that terrified other alphas. They could push their emotions into others. They could make an enemy feel paralyzing fear or overwhelming guilt, just by being near them. He thought back to the venison, the taste of overwhelming grief that had stopped him cold. Pierre the chef didn't make that sauce, Sophie. You did. You put your grief into it, not metaphorically, literally. You flavored the food with your soul. Sophie looked horrified. I didn't mean to. Am I a witch? No, Declan said, reaching across the table to cover her small, scarred hand with his massive one. You are an Argentis. Your parents weren't killed in an accident. They were assassinated in a power struggle before I became king. I thought the line ended with them. He looked at the bruises that were fading on her arms. Gareth knew. Declan realized, anger simmering again. He knew who you were. He recognized the ability. That's why he beat you. Why he kept you exhausted, starving and terrified. He was suppressing your power with trauma. If you were too busy surviving, you'd never be able to fight back. Sophie pulled her hand away, overwhelmed. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't understand. I'm just the kitchen girl. No, Declan stood up, his presence filling the room. You are the daughter of nobility. You are the survivor of a massacre, and you are under my protection. He walked to the window, looking down at the smoky ruins of the town square below. Gareth was right to be afraid, Declan vowed, because now I know what they stole from you. And today, I'm going to make sure everyone else knows the price of stealing from a wolf under my protection. Date: November 15th, 2023, 12 p.m. Location: Oakhaven Town Square. The tribunal was not held indoors. Declan ordered it held in the town square, under the grey, snow-heavy sky, right in front of the smouldering ruins of the rustling pine. The entire town of Oakhaven, 3,000 souls, was gathered. They stood in the ankle-deep snow, shivering not just from the cold, but from the aura radiating from the center of the square. Declan sat on a high-backed wooden chair that had been brought out from the town hall. It looked like a throne. He wore a heavy black wool coat adorned with the silver insignia of the king. Behind him stood 5 other imposing figures, the regional alphas he had summoned via helicopter that morning. They stood with arms crossed, their expressions grim. They were the jury, but Declan was the executioner. In the center of the square, kneeling in the snow, was Gareth Miller. He was burned on his left side, his expensive suit tattered, his face swollen from where Kieran had subdued him. He was shivering violently, and standing next to Declan, wrapped in a cashmere coat that cost more than Gareth's car, was Sophie. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide in the kitchen, but Declan had instructed her, stand tall. Do not look down. Let them see you. Declan stood. The whispering in the crowd died instantly. For 14 years, Declan's voice boomed, amplified by the natural acoustics of the square and his own alpha authority. A crime has been committed in plain sight in Oakhaven. He gestured to Gareth. This man, your beta, held an orphaned girl in slavery. He falsified debts, he denied medical care, and he utilized physical torture on a weekly basis to maintain control. Kieran stepped forward and threw the charred lockbox onto the snowy ground. It burst open, spilling the partially burned, illegal ledger pages. "We knew!" Gareth shouted, his voice cracking. "We all knew! Don't act like you didn't, you cowards!" He looked wildly at the crowd. "Mayor! Sheriff! You ate the food! You saw her black eyes! You laughed about it!" The mayor shrank down into his coat collar. The crowd shifted uneasily. Declan looked at the townsfolk. His gaze was a physical weight. "Is this true?" Declan asked the crowd. "Did you see this child bleeding and turn away because the steak was cooked to your liking?" Silence. "Speak!" Declan roared, the sound causing snow to fall from the nearby roofs. A woman near the front, the owner of the bakery, started crying. "We were afraid, Alpha King. Gareth, he controls everything. The loans, the housing. If we spoke up, he'd ruin us." "So you let him ruin her instead," Declan said cruelly. He turned back to Gareth. "Gareth Miller, your crimes are manifold. Financial fraud, kidnapping, assault, attempted arson. But your greatest crime," Declan paused, looking at Sophie, "was trying to extinguish a fire that was meant to burn bright." He turned to the gathered regional alphas. "The evidence is clear. What say you?" "Guilty," the alpha of the Eastern Territory growled. "Guilty," said the Southern alpha. The verdict was unanimous. "The punishment for high treason against a protected wolf is death," Declan stated. Gareth began to sob. "Please, please, Alpha King. I'll leave. I'll never come back." "Death is too easy," Declan continued, ignoring him. "You liked control, Gareth. You liked making someone feel powerless." Declan walked down the steps of the makeshift dais and stood over Gareth. He placed his hand on Gareth's forehead. "By my authority as king, I strip you of your rank. I strip you of your wolf." The scream that tore from Gareth's throat was inhuman. It wasn't pain. It was the agonizing sensation of his connection to the pack, his primal instincts, his very soul being surgically severed. He convulsed in the snow, then went limp, panting. He was no longer a beta. He was barely even a werewolf. He was something less than human. "You will live out your days in the northern mining colonies," Declan sentenced. "You will break rocks in the dark until you die of old age or exhaustion. Take him." Kieran and Bastian dragged the sobbing, broken man away. But Declan wasn't finished. He turned back to the town. The 3,000 people who had watched and done nothing. "And now, for Oakhaven," Declan said. The temperature in the square seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You claimed you were silent because you were afraid. You claimed you saw nothing." He stepped back up to Sophie and placed a hand on her shoulder. "This woman is Sophie Argentis, the last of a noble line. You treated royalty like garbage." A gasp rippled through the older members of the crowd, who remembered the Argentis name. "Since you enjoy silence so much," Declan decreed, his voice ringing like iron, "you shall have it." He raised his hands. A visible ripple of alpha energy, a shimmering wave of dominance, washed over the crowd. People fell to their knees, gasping. From this day forth, Oakhaven is a silent territory. No wolf from this pack is permitted to speak to an outsider. You will hold no council seats. You will host no gatherings. You are shunned. You existed in the shadows of this girl's pain. So now, you shall live in the shadows of my kingdom. It was a death sentence for a town. Without trade, without political connection, Oakhaven would wither and die a slow, quiet death. Declan turned to Sophie. "Come, we are leaving this place." He led her through the kneeling, terrified crowd toward his awaiting convoy. Nobody made a sound. The only noise was the crunch of their boots on the snow and the dying crackle of the fire that had exposed everything. Sophie didn't look back at the town that had been her prison. She only looked forward, toward the massive black SUV, and the strange, terrifying man who held her hand as if it were made of precious glass. The silence of the town was deafening, but for the first time in her life, the silence inside Sophie's head was gone. Date, January 12th, 2024. Location, the Obsidian Palace, Royal Wing. Time, 4:30 a.m. The silence in the Obsidian Palace was different from the silence in Oakhaven. In Oakhaven, silence was a threat. It was the holding of breath before a blow landed. It was the stifled sob in a pillow. But here, in the Alpha King's private estate, perched high on the cliffs of the capital, silence was expensive. It was heavy drapes muffling the wind. It was thick carpets swallowing footsteps. It was peace. But Sophie Hart, now Sophie Argentis, didn't know how to sleep in peace. Her internal clock, set by 14 years of kitchen duty, woke her at 4:30 a.m. sharp. Her eyes snapped open, staring at the canopy of the massive 4-poster bed. For a split second, panic seized her chest. She wasn't in the damp basement. She wasn't on the cot. She sat up, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and smooth. She slid out of bed, her bare feet sinking into a rug that likely cost more than Gareth Miller's entire restaurant. She needed to work. Her hands were itching for a knife, a whisk, a rag, anything to justify her existence. In her mind, if she wasn't useful, she wasn't safe. Sophie crept out of the bedroom, wearing a silk oversized shirt Declan had given her. She wandered down the marble hallway, avoiding the night guards, until she found the royal kitchens. It was a gleaming cathedral of stainless steel and copper. It was empty, save for the hum of the industrial refrigerators. Sophie exhaled, her shoulders finally dropping. She found a bag of onions on a prep counter. Instinct took over. She found a knife. She started chopping. Chop, chop, chop. The rhythm was a lullaby. The sharp scent of onions stung her eyes, grounding her in reality. "I have 20 world-class chefs on payroll," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows, "and yet I find the future queen dicing onions in the dark." Sophie spun around, the knife slipping from her hand and clattering onto the floor. She flinched, backing up against the counter, her hands automatically going to protect her head. Declan stepped into the light. He was wearing grey sweatpants and a black t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad chest. He stopped instantly when he saw her flinch. His jaw tightened, a flash of pain crossing his storm-grey eyes. He didn't move closer. He stayed still, letting her realize where she was. "Sophie," he said softly, "it's me. It's Declan. No one is going to hit you." Sophie lowered her arms slowly, her breathing ragged. I'm sorry, Alpha. I woke up. I didn't know what to do. I needed to be useful." "Useful." Declan repeated the word like it tasted of poison. He walked over, not to her, but to the knife. He picked it up and placed it in the sink. Then he turned to her. "You are not a tool, Sophie. You are not a blender or a stove. You don't need to be useful to earn your place here." He reached out, waiting for her to nod before he closed the distance. He wrapped his warm, large hands around her freezing ones. "You are an Argentis. Do you know what the tutors told me yesterday?" Sophie looked down. "That I'm difficult?" Declan let out a low, rough laugh. "No. Madame Corinne said you are the most powerful empath she has ever tested. You almost made her pass out during the meditation session, because you accidentally projected a wave of gratitude so strong it made her knees weak." Sophie blushed. "I was just happy she was nice to me." "That is your power, Sophie," Declan said, lifting her chin so she had to look at him. "You feel everything, and you can make the world feel it too. That isn't being useful. That is being dangerous, and it is being beautiful." Wham! He pulled her into his chest. She rested her ear against his sternum, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. "Go back to bed," he whispered into her hair. "Or if you can't sleep, come back to my room. I can't sleep either." Sophie looked up. "Nightmares?" "Something like that," Declan admitted, his alpha mask slipping for just a second to reveal the tired man beneath. "It's lonely at the top, little wolf. The silence gets loud for me, too." Date, February 1st, 2024. Location, the training hall. "Focus," Madame Corinne barked, tapping her cane on the floor. Sophie stood in the center of the training mat. She was sweating, Madame Corinne was a retired enforcer, 70 years old, with steel grey hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "You are retreating again, child," Corinne scolded. "You are pulling your aura in tight like a turtle in a shell. Expand, push." "I can't," Sophie gasped. "If I push, I'm afraid I'll hurt someone." "You are an Argentis," Corinne countered. "Your bloodline served as the king's executioners, yes. But they were also the king's conscience. They forced tyrants to feel the pain of their victims. You cannot heal if you do not acknowledge the wound. Now push." Sophie closed her eyes. She thought of the basement. She thought of the smell of burnt sugar and old blood. She thought of Gareth's laugh. No, she thought. Not that. I don't want to spread that. She shifted her focus. She thought of the first time Declan looked at her, really looked at her, in the restaurant. The feeling of being seen, the warmth of the eucalyptus balm on her cheek, the safety of the black SUV driving away from the fire. Safe, warm, protected. She grabbed that feeling, balled it up in her chest, and shoved it outward. The effect was instantaneous. Across the room, Madame Corinne stopped tapping her cane. Her shoulders slumped. A guard standing by the door, a massive man named Elias, let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes closing. The air in the room changed. It didn't feel like a gym anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. It felt like coming home after a long war. Madame Corinne opened her eyes. They were wet. "Well," the old woman whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "That was considerable." The doors to the gym opened. Declan walked in, flanked by Kieran. Declan stopped dead in his tracks. He blinked, shaking his head as if waking from a trance. "What is this?" Declan asked, looking around the room. "Why does it smell like—" "Sunlight," Madame Corinne bowed. "Your Majesty, your mate has finally stopped hiding." Declan looked at Sophie. She was panting, drained, but she was standing tall. There was a glow to her skin, a vitality that had replaced the grey pallor of starvation. He walked over to her, ignoring the audience. "You did this?" he asked. I wanted you to feel how you make me feel," Sophie whispered shyly. Declan stared at her, stunned. The ruthlessness that usually lived in his eyes vanished, replaced by a raw, naked adoration. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, right over a faint, white scar. "If you do that at the gala," Declan murmured against her skin, "you won't just be queen, you'll be a goddess." Date, February 14th, 2024. Event, the Winter Solstice Gala location, the Grand Ballroom. The night of the gala arrived with a snowstorm, fitting for the winter solstice. The Obsidian Palace was illuminated by thousands of golden lights, acting as a beacon against the dark, freezing ocean. Inside the royal suite, the atmosphere was frantic. "Hold still, Your Highness," the stylist muttered, pinning a diamond clip into Sophie's hair. Sophie stood in front of the floor-length mirror. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. The dress was a masterpiece. It was a deep emerald green velvet that hugged her waist and flowed out into a dramatic train. It was off the shoulder, daringly exposing her arms. For weeks, the stylists had tried to find boleros or gloves to cover the scars, the cigarette burns, the whip marks. But Declan had forbidden it. "Those are not marks of shame," he had told her. "They are battle scars. You survived a war that would have killed most alphas. Wear them." So her arms were bare. The scars were there, faint silvery lines against her skin, but they didn't look ugly. They looked like history. There was a knock on the door. The stylists bowed and scurried away as King Declan entered. He was wearing a formal military dress uniform, black with silver piping, medals gleaming on his chest. He looked every inch the conqueror. But when he saw Sophie, he stopped. He didn't say a word. He just breathed out, as if she was the only oxygen in the room. "Do I look okay?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "I feel like a child playing dress-up." Declan walked behind her. He met her eyes in the mirror. "You look like the only thing that matters," he said intensely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside was a necklace. It wasn't diamonds. It was a simple, heavy silver pendant, the Argentis wolf crest, restored and polished. He clasped it around her neck. It rested right on her collarbone. "Your father's crest," Declan said. "Tonight, you take back your name." Sophie touched the cold metal. She took a deep breath. The fear was there, fluttering in her stomach like a trapped bird. But she wasn't alone. "Ready?" Declan asked, offering his arm. Sophie looked at the scars on her arm. She looked at the king who loved her. She looked at the crest. "Ready," she said. The grand ballroom was a shark tank. 500 of the most powerful werewolves on the continent were gathered. Regional alphas, wealthy business moguls, old nobility. They were drinking champagne and whispering. The rumors had been flying for months. The king has a stray, a kitchen wench, a mute cripple. "I heard she can't even read," the alpha of the Western pack sneered to his wife. "Disgraceful. He's weak." "I heard Gareth Miller kept her in a cage," another whispered. "She's probably feral." At the top of the grand staircase, the heavy oak doors groaned open. The herald banged his staff 3 times. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "His Majesty, King Declan Blackwood!" Declan stepped out to the landing. The crowd bowed, a sea of bent necks. And, the herald's voice boom again, "Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Oakhaven, the last of the Argentis line. Sophie." Sophie stepped out. She didn't look down. She didn't cling to Declan's arm. She stood slightly apart from him, her chin raised. The emerald dress caught the light. The silver wolf crest burned on her throat. A gasp rippled through the crowd. They saw the scars. They saw the proud tilt of her head. But mostly, they felt her. Sophie looked at the faces below. She saw the judgment. She saw the sneers on the faces of the elite. And she remembered the feeling of the soup, the feeling of truth. She opened her mental gates. She didn't project fear. She didn't project anger. She projected dominance. Not the aggressive, growling dominance of an alpha male, but the ancient, terrifying stillness of the deep ocean. It was a wave of pure, regal silence. The chatter stopped instantly. The music stopped. The waiters froze. The sensation washed over the crowd. It forced them to stand straighter. It stripped away their pettiness, their gossip, their cruelty. For a moment, every wolf in the room felt the weight of their own souls. In that silence, Sophie began to descend the stairs. Declan walked beside her, a smirk playing on his lips. He watched his colleagues, men who had tried to cheat him on trade deals, women who had tried to seduce him for power, all trembling under the pressure of his little cook's will. They reached the bottom of the stairs. The Western Alpha, the one who had sneered, was now pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Declan stopped in the center of the room. He turned to Sophie. He didn't need a microphone. In the silence she had created, a whisper would have been heard. "They said you were broken," Declan said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner. He took her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist, right over a scar. But they forgot that swords are forged in fire. He turned to the crowd, his eyes flashing gold. Oakhaven paid the price for ignoring her. Do not make the same mistake. This is your queen. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me. Anyone who hurts her answers to her. He looked at the Western Alpha, and I assure you, she is far more creative with punishment than I am. The Western Alpha gulped and bowed low, lower than he had ever bowed before. "Long live the Queen," he stammered. It started as a murmur, then became a chant. "Long live the Queen. Long live the Queen." Sophie felt the wall of sound hit her, but this time she didn't flinch. She smiled. It was a small, mysterious smile. "Dance with me?" she asked Declan. "I thought you'd never ask." The orchestra, terrified into excellence, began to play a waltz. Declan swept her into his arms. They spun across the floor, a blur of black and emerald. "You terrified them," Declan whispered, sounding delighted. "It was the hottest thing I've ever seen." Sophie laughed, throwing her head back. "I just wanted some peace and quiet." "You have it," Declan promised. "You have it all." "By the way," Sophie whispered, Leaning in close as the music swelled, I checked the menu for tonight. "Oh no," Declan groaned. "Is it bad?" "It's venison," Sophie grinned. "The sauce is adequate. But I think I'll need to go back into the kitchen tomorrow and show them how it's really done." "You are the queen of the 7 territories," Declan laughed. "You can't cook." "Watch me," Sophie challenged. And as the Alpha King spun his Omega Queen under the lights of 1,000 crystals, the scars on her arms seemed to fade, outshined by the brilliance of the future they were building together. The girl who had hidden in the dark was now the brightest light in the kingdom, and for the first time in history, the wolves didn't howl at the moon. They bowed to the girl who had tamed it. And that, my friends, is how a simple bowl of soup toppled a tyrant and crowned a queen. Sophie's story reminds us that true strength